Hello and welcome back to Vox Terra, aka Hidden Agendas. Well, I consider the cause to protect our climate, the cause to protect our environment, one of the most important political causes of our time. And that is why it is so important to understand how we are portrayed to those who have been tricked into thinking they disagree with us, and to not become a caricature of that portrayal. So I want to share with you, before I share with you a quote by an American politician, I want to share with you a quote I heard from one of my viewers' kids, a second grader at the time, who somehow parsed together what we look like. This kid sympathizes with climate change and the cause. That kid said, the way we look to those on the outside, we look like, do drugs and change your sex and climate change is real. Oh no. We are portrayed to look crazy. We are portrayed to look like the forces of chaos, when in reality, we're the opposite. Because we're trying to stop the ultimate destabilizing thing for our society, which is the superheating of our planet and the destabilizing of all the weather conditions, as well as the pumping full of this biosphere with greenhouse gases, endocrine disruptors, and neurotoxins. Well, somehow, that second grader nailed it. Because now I'm going to share with you a quote from an American politician by the name of Mark Robinson, who's a Trumper. Oh, and by the way, he's also Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina. And this is a quote he made back in 2021.
The transgender movement in this country, if there's a movement in this country that is demonic, and that is full of the spirit of Antichrist, it is the transgender movement. And this same people gonna tell me, you need to believe in global warming. And then they tell me, follow the science. Follow the science. You don't even know what gender you are.
Well, my first point here is to warn against one-sided narratives on the culture war, so-called culture war. Really, these should just be cultural disagreements. I want to show how that trust the science, he said, is being used, and it's almost opposite, to defend the climate denial industry, which is in itself a defense of petrochemicals, fossil fuels. And I want to, from a biblical standpoint, examine where does Satan or these demonic forces really lie.
Satan!
Well, first, let's start with this culture war trap. And why do I call it a trap? Because if you don't understand how each side identifies as good within themselves, you're missing it, and that's how you're easily divided. Look, liberals see themselves as defending the oppressed, standing up for people's rights, allowing for their freedoms. The liberal left completely sees itself as standing for the oppressed, and they are standing up to the large corporations that dominate our society. The conservatives see themselves in a positive light as defenders of order, defenders of tradition, and in that way, defenders of safety, defenders of the weak. Well, my first point, if I got any conservatives listening, which I hope I do, climate change denial is not inherently conservative. I don't see how it is. What I think it is an excellent marketing ploy or propaganda from what I call the reckless elements of the fossil fuel petrochemical industry who have successfully put on a conservative cloak. But to my liberal friends, I just want to warn you that industry does put on a liberal cloak when needed as well. Now, the left, the liberal left, or the true left, and what I mean by that is maybe like a Marxist, somebody who is saying, our society is dominated by these business interests, and that's the problem. That's why they took an interest in climate change, because it's emanating from fossil fuel industry dominance. Well, they would see, like I do, that conservative values have been hijacked by those reckless elements to get people to vote against their own interest, but they would completely dismiss most conservative values as being inherently oppressive. I don't do that. I see how some conservative values as providing order and safety for people, a framework, a social framework for society to fit into. Well, part of the reason why this culture war is so blown up is the nature of our media, the nature of our politics, the nature of money in politics and the media. Look, our media is all either owned, sponsored by, supported by advertising from large business interests and wealthy individuals. Within the so-called conservative sphere, they're going to host actual climate change deniers who are coming from those industry think tanks. Now, the liberal sphere would never do that, but they will by omission, by downplay, by failure to just consistently connect the dots back from these extreme weather events to our heating planet, deprioritize what should be the biggest priority of our time. It is just easier for politicians and that media to not step on the toes of their donors, of their supporters. Make the battle lines about stop those chaos mongering liberal leftist wackos, or stop those mean, nasty, conservative oppressors. That's what they want to make the battle about. Well, within the liberal sphere, in my opinion, their one-sided narrative on some of these social issues like trans leads to a backlash, predictably. Well, look, what do I mean? If the narrative, if the cause was just stopped at do not pick on people, do not harass people, do not bully people, do not physically attack people due to their identity, that would have really big buy-in from a lot of folks, including, I promise you, many of those Catholics and religious and Baptists who are more conservative leaning. And not even just them, but a lot of average folks who are quietly, secretly in disagreement. Because if you listen to these liberal outlets, if you're within some of these circles, you're going to think, is there really no reasonable disagreement with performing surgical procedures, cosmetic surgical procedures that remove or add parts, or performing hormonal treatments on underage youth, on minors? Is it really unreasonable to disagree with that? Is it really unreasonable to disagree with changing what we all grew up with as the definition of taxonomy, the male-female classification? And yes, I get that some people are born hermaphroditic or hermaphrodites. I understand that. Some animals are, not just people, within the mammal class that we're a member of. But consider this making gender a construct rather than a taxonomical classification. We are applying this to one mammal species only, that's humans. And look, I think it's perfectly reasonable to question roles, affects, all the trappings assigned to gender, assigned to sex by society. To me, that makes a lot of sense to question that. But I still think it's reasonable to question not being allowed to question changing the definition of male-female. In a sense, you could argue it's giving in to society's definition of what male-female is and then altering your body and now altering this taxonomical classification to match that. Furthermore, I guarantee you many people feel pressured into using language they are not comfortable with, they are not happy with using. And I think that is so obvious that reasonable disagreement is silenced. This is obviously going to serve as a Republican recruiting tool. And that is dangerous because the Republican Party is, as I've said, dominated right now by fossil fuel petrochemical interests. And in a media environment that in both spheres downplays what is happening to our environment due to this consumer rat race we are trapped in, that obviously leads itself to false conspiracy narratives. Well, are these issues even necessarily married? Should they even necessarily be clumped together? Well, look, conservatives, have you heard of endocrine disruptors? How liberals have you, for that matter? Endocrine disruptors are a chemical found within many plastics, within many petrochemical-based products. They are now circulating throughout our biosphere. They affect the very sex characteristics, the endocrine system of living animals, including affecting fertility rates, the very sorts of issues that Mark Robinson claims he's concerned about. Now, for the whole demonic concept. Satan. Jesus Christ was quoted in the Bible, I think it was Matthew 22:28, when he was asked, Jesus, what happens to a woman who has been several times widowed? And then what happens to her soul when she's resurrected? Who will she be married to? Jesus said something like, you do not understand the power of God, my friend. Our souls, when resurrected, are not going to be married. They are as angels. Well, in a sense, could you interpret that as non-binary? Where Jesus, in my opinion, really emphasized where the devil exists, or Satan, was in moneyed interest. Remember, it was in the desert when he was tempted by the devil, offered all the riches and power and glory in this world. If he cooperated, Jesus turned it down. Jesus kicked the money changers out of the temple, showing his disdain for money and religion. Jesus said to the rich man, "Partner, you got to give up all your wealth and come follow me." The rich man walked away dispirited. Many warnings about the corrupting influence of money. And fossil fuel petrochemicals are among the most powerful industries on this planet and have been since the dawn of capitalism. Now, out of fairness, let's compare that to there's moneyed interest in these surgeries and hormonal procedures too, amigo. Well, they're going to benefit pharmaceuticals, obviously. They're going to benefit well-paid cosmetic or plastic surgeons and the psychologists who are doing the referrals. And you may think it's ludicrous, this is our choice at the ballot box, but it is. So you got to weigh it out now. Where's the devil really more present? Which moneyed interest? Where's it bigger? Where's it greater? Where's the harm greater? Well, if you listen to our media, you might think this issue is all about trans, who to vote for. No, it's much bigger than that, because our biosphere itself is being pumped. It's the chemistry of the biosphere is being altered. The land itself is being altered and damaged. We have an epidemic of cancer and a heating planet and runaway global warming, or we're getting there. So you ask yourself, if you think both are harms, where's the bigger harm? It has never been as simple as some of these so-called conservative preachers like to say, that the devil's on one side with the liberals and God's on the side with the conservatives. Clearly, that's not the case. You do not have an easy choice. You gotta weigh it out. That is why it is so important to transcend culture war. And how about that whole trust the science that Mark Robinson said? Well, it's a straw man argument for one. Straw man, I mean, he created a fake version of his opponent. Because look, Greta Thunberg, famous climate activist, Bill McKibben, another one, but scientists, Peter Kalmus, climate activist and NASA scientist. Michael Mann, another big one. Naomi Oreskes, and James Hansen, going back to 1988, I think, NASA scientist, Carl Sagan even, ringing that alarm bell. Well, I've heard none of them identify as trans. So who are these people that he's claiming are telling him, who are trans, who are telling him, warning him, trust the science on global warming? It's a fiction. I mean, is he really having conversations with a lot of trans individuals? He doesn't sound like he would be. But one of the reasons why that saying trust the science, really on the liberal boards, they don't say trust the science, they say I believe in science. One of the reasons why that can feel a little off-putting is because, well, first of all, what do you mean you believe in science? Science isn't a belief system, it's a method. So that gets me to how our education system really doesn't train us much about science at all. So we barely get what scientific consensus means. We barely get what peer review means. We barely understand credible from non-credible sources of scientific information. And one thing really missing from the equation is industry sponsorship of science, that petrochemical fossil fuel industry sponsorship of science that has worked through much of academia. And so in that way, this is almost mirror opposite of what people like Mark Robinson are saying, because it's the influence of that industry that has, in my opinion, cowed scientists from speaking up. It has caused for a lot of confusion, and even, I believe, the constant name changing from man-made greenhouse effect to global warming to climate change, almost part of a long game to undermine the cause. It's that industry's influence that has delayed our knowledge of how bad the situation really is. Well, I hope you found this video interesting, at least insightful. I hope you're subscribed to my channel. You click that notification bell so you know when I put up a new video. You're liking, you're commenting, you are making that step and just joining a Patreon. Thank you, Bella Lagrusi and Environmental Coffee House. And I know there ain't a lot to show at that Patreon page now, but you know, one thing at a time here, people. This show's a lot to put together. And as always, until next time, peace be with you.